Our recent brief history episodes regarding hauntings have all seemed to have one thing in common. Of course, aside from the supposed demonic entities haunting these families. And that common denominator is skepticism. From the infamous Warrens, who are known to have embellished or entirely made up narratives to fit the story of them being religious saviors of families being attacked by pure evil, to family members giving contradictory stories when being interviewed. Our subject today is one of the most observed and also the most contested on the basis of truth. This is a brief history of the Enfield Poltergeist. As always, this episode of A Brief History may contain graphic content and is not suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Today, we are building the home of Peggy Hodgson and her children, based off exterior photos and an interior layout, which did have to be changed slightly to accommodate the limitations within The Sims 4. Peggy Hodgson was a divorced mother of 4 living in Enfield, London, between the years of 1977 and 1979. Her 4 children included Margaret, who was 13, Janet, who was 11, Johnny, who was 10, and Billy, who was 7. During their time residing in their rented council home, it would be Margaret and Janet who seemed to be the main subjects on the receiving end of the horrors happening in the house. The activity surrounded the girls like a dark cloud, and while other family members claimed to have seen, heard, and remember things happening around the home, their experiences seemed to be drops in the ocean compared to what the girls would endure. The story of the Enfield Poltergeist begins in 1977. The Hodgson family were all home, with Peggy downstairs and the children in their rooms upstairs getting ready for bed. While going about her evening, Peggy heard a loud thud coming from one of the bedrooms upstairs. Fearing that one of her children had fallen or broken something, she rushed upstairs to find Margaret and Janet in their room, hiding in the corner, with terrified looks on their faces, and a dresser curiously moved to the center of the room. Both girls were adamant that the dresser had moved on its own and had been seen sliding towards the door as if it were trying to lock them in their room. Peggy was, of course, unamused by her daughters claiming the dresser was moving on its own and assumed that they were just trying to find a way around bedtime. But when Peggy herself went to go push the dresser back, the dresser did move, but in the direction of the door to the bedroom. And no matter how much force she used, the dresser would not budge to go back to its original placement. The girls felt validated, but Peggy was terrified. She gathered up her kids and ran next door to the neighbor's house for help. One of the neighbors, Vic Nottingham, quickly sprung into action and went next door to the Hodgson's home to see if there was anyone inside. When he found nothing, Mr. Nottingham did claim that while he was in the house, he heard noises, and the decision was made to call the police. The police arrived at the Hodgson home and walked through, with one officer stating that they had seen a chair move across the room on its own, but nothing otherwise. They deemed the instance not a police matter and left. The family attempted to move on, but these strange occurrences got more frequent and more terrifying. From mysterious knocking sounds to the children claiming their beds were shaking, Peggy began looking for any explanation as to what could be happening, especially since most of the occurrences happened when Janet was present. Soon after the visit from police, things like toys began being tossed around the house, and like many other instances, Janet seemed to be involved. Peggy began asking and accusing her daughter of throwing items while she wasn't looking, and even believed that Janet had gotten her older sister Margaret in on the fun, since Margaret happened to witness a lot of the events surrounding Janet, and even began claiming things were happening to her as well. In one story, the girls were at school, and Margaret stopped, seeming to be frozen precariously at the top of a set of stairs while yelling, "I can't move, something is holding me." Even when the girls were separated, as in times when they were visiting a different friend's home, they said the activity continued to follow them. But notably, there were no records of activity happening at the house in Enfield if at least one of the girls was not present. And when Janet was hospitalized for 6 weeks for a psychological evaluation, nothing happened to her while she was at the hospital. While at home, Margaret seemed to be the new favorite victim of whatever entity they believed was haunting the house. From an outside perspective, it seems fairly obvious that the girls were involved, but eventually the entire Hodgson family began to believe something was happening in their house, and they were terrified. Eventually, Peggy Hodgson called the UK publication The Daily Mail to come and investigate her home in hopes of finding answers as to what was happening to her and her family. A reporter obliged and sat at the house for hours with absolutely nothing happening, until he went to leave. As the reporter went to exit the house, a Lego hit him above the eye hard enough to leave a mark on his face. This prompted the reporter to get in touch with Maurice Grosse of the Society for Psychical Research, and during Grosse's time investigating the home, he claims to have witnessed over 2,000 different supernatural events. Furniture would be found around the house toppled over. Fires would start seemingly on their own. And Janet claimed that while she was sleeping, a cord from the curtain wrapped itself around her neck like a snake. The occurrences grew, and eventually Janet began claiming that she would wake up to find herself levitating, even getting photographic evidence. Doubts began to trickle in due to the fact that things would only happen around the house under two circumstances. Either the cameras brought in by the investigative crew were turned off, or Janet was present. The paranormal crew also noted that the kids would play tricks and seemed to be trying to add on to the activity that was going on in the house. The investigators were unconcerned by this, stating it was obvious when the kids were involved versus when actual paranormal activity was happening. After some time of investigation, the entity began to speak. Through Janet. The voice that came from Janet, who was normally a high-pitched and playful young girl, was a deep, growling sort of voice, and claimed to be a man named Bill Wilkins who had died in the house. It was later proven that a man named Bill Wilkins had lived and died in the home previously, leading the investigators to believe that this was actually happening, rather than just one of the children finding out that a man had died in their house. When the entity spoke through Janet, it was observed that her lips rarely moved. The investigative team took this as authenticity, much to the chagrin of paranormal skeptics who were convinced that Janet, and to a lesser extent her sister Margaret, simply enjoyed the attention. But according to the investigative team, there were enough instances of what they claimed to be real activity that they were sold on the voice communicating through the young girl. As time went on, other paranormal investigators were called in, including our favorites, Ed and Lorraine Warren, who showed up seemingly uninvited, stayed a short period of time, declared there was a demon in the home before promptly leaving. The Hodgson family eventually moved out of the house in 1979 after enduring 18 months of activity. Grosse, the investigator from Society for Psychical Research, as well as his partner Guy Playfair, who had been investigating the home and family for months, were convinced the haunting was genuine, despite the overwhelming evidence and flat-out confession from Janet and Margaret Hodgson that they had made it all up to trick the investigators. Janet was observed attempting to bend spoons and metal rods when she thought people weren't looking. The entity speaking through Janet suspiciously had these same speaking quirks as Janet, such as frequently changing the subject. And the entity also seemed to be fascinated with the subject of menstruation, which made no sense if it was the entity of an old man, but was very on par with a young girl going through puberty. A ventriloquist even observed video footage and Janet herself, and concluded that the young girl was just a naturally talented ventriloquist. Despite all of this evidence against the haunting in Enfield, Grosse and Playfair maintained that if the tricks played by the children were put aside, there was still enough true activity happening in the house. This opened them up to criticism from both the paranormal and skeptic communities for being so easily tricked by two young girls. The story of the Enfield Poltergeist was heavily embellished and turned into the movie The Conjuring 2, which also claims that Ed and Lorraine Warren spent countless hours in the house saving the family from a demonic entity meant to steal Janet's soul. The story has also been featured in mockumentaries, episodes of Strange But True and Ghost Stories, as well as numerous podcasts and paranormal documentaries. What do you believe happened in Enfield? Was it all the product of a bored preteen who wanted to cause trouble? Was there really an entity in the home? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me for another episode of A Brief History. Thank you to my patrons who support this channel. You are so much appreciated. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.